In the grand halls of the Galactic Concordat, Ambassador Excelfar adjusted his ceremonial robes for the seventh time that cycle. The Centennial Assembly was moments away from beginning, and everything had to be perfect. 500 species, tens of thousands of representatives, all gathered in the massive crystalline chamber that floated in neutral space. It was meant to be a celebration of 5,000 years of galactic cooperation and careful expansion. Nobody expected the humans to crash it. Unidentified vessel approaching the diplomatic exclusion zone. The automated system chimed. On the massive holographic displays that wrapped around the chamber's curved walls, a small ship appeared. It was ugly by any species standards, a blocky, asymmetrical thing that looked like it had been welded together from spare parts. "Impossible," muttered First Speaker Venra, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with irritation. "The coordinates for this gathering are encrypted with quantum-locked keys. No non-member species should even know we're here." The ship didn't slow down. If anything, it accelerated. "Defensive screens," Selfer suggested, trying to keep his voice steady. In 5 millennia, no violence had ever occurred at a Concordat gathering. But there was always a first time. "Unnecessary," Venra replied, her patterns now showing amusement. "Our combined fleet could vaporize that vessel 1,000 times over. Besides, look at their approach vector." Zelthar studied the holographic projection. The ship was indeed coming in fast, but its trajectory was perfect, too perfect. It would pass through the exact center of the gathered fleet, missing every ship by meters, before coming to a stop precisely at the designated diplomatic approach point. That's when the transmission came through. "Greetings, Galactic Concordat. Sorry we're late to the party. Had to crack your encryption, figure out your protocols, and build a ship that could make the journey. But hey, we brought snacks." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from hundreds of species began talking at once, their universal translators creating a cacophony of overlapping languages. Zelthar noticed that the quantum logic collective representatives were actually smoking slightly, their circuits apparently unable to process this violation of expected parameters. The human ship, and they were definitely humans, no other species would be so audacious, was now perfectly stationed outside the main diplomatic dock. Close-up scans showed it was held together with what appeared to be construction foam and optimism. "This is outrageous." The Regelian delegation spokesman had taken the floor, his crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "We've spent centuries carefully managing the introduction of new species to the Concordat. There are protocols, procedures. You can't just show up." The human response came through crystal clear. "Why not? You've been watching us for decades, debating whether we're ready to join your little club. We figured we'd save you the trouble and prove we belong here." First Speaker Venera raised all 4 of her appendages, calling for order. "Humans," she spoke directly to the ship, "your presence here is unprecedented. Your violation of our security protocols alone should result in immediate quarantine of your species." About those protocols, the human voice replied, sounding almost cheerful, "We have some suggestions for improvements. Your quantum encryption is solid, but you might want to look into something we call social engineering. Also, we noticed your fleet's defense grid has a 3-second synchronization lag every time it updates. Might want to fix that too." The chamber went silent. Selthar felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. Did these humans just casually point out security flaws that no one had noticed in thousands of years? "As for belonging here," the human continued, "we thought actions speak louder than words. So we built this ship specifically to demonstrate a few things. First, that we could find you. Second, that we could reach you. And third," there was a pause, and Selthar could have sworn he heard something like suppressed laughter, "that we could do it with technology you considered primitive. This entire ship was built using only technologies that were theoretically known to humanity before we detected your first probe." The quantum logic collective representatives were now openly sparking, their circuits completely overwhelmed by the implications. First speaker Venra's bioluminescence had shifted to a pattern Selfar had never seen before. You built an interstellar ship using pre-contact technology, specifically to crash our most sacred gathering, to prove a point. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit dramatic, the human admitted. But we also brought those snacks we mentioned. Traditional Earth delicacies. We've got something called pizza that we think the Methane Brothers will particularly enjoy. In that moment, as he watched the most dignified gathering in known space dissolve into confusion over the concept of recreational sustenance, Zelthar realized something that would soon become common knowledge throughout the galaxy. Humans didn't just think differently. They made different thinking look like the most natural thing in the universe. So, the human voice chirped again. Where should we park? The emergency session of the Concordet's inner circle was not going well. Gathered in the sphere of contemplation, a room whose quantum crystalline walls absorbed all forms of electromagnetic radiation to ensure absolute privacy. 13 of the galaxy's most powerful beings struggled to handle what several were already calling the human situation. They have to be eliminated, Grand Archon Zix of the Silicon Consciousness declared, his holographic form flickering with agitation. Their very existence threatens the careful order we have maintained for millennia. Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human representative who had been grudgingly invited to the session, sat calmly in her chair, sipping something she called coffee from an insulated container. The fact that she had somehow smuggled a beverage into a room where matter itself was supposed to be strictly controlled had not gone unnoticed. With all due respect, Grand Archon, she said, setting down her cup, threatening to eliminate us is exactly why we chose to introduce ourselves the way we did. Your probes weren't just observing Earth. They were assessing whether we could be easily controlled. First speaker Venra's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deep indigo, a sign of reluctant agreement among her species. The human speaks truth. Our standard protocols for emerging species do include evaluation of containment potential, which is exactly why those protocols need to change, Sarah continued. The galaxy is evolving. New species are emerging faster than ever. Your old methods of careful control and gradual integration won't work forever. And you propose what exactly? The question came from Elder Xin of the Quantum Logic Collective, who had finally managed to stop smoking after emergency repairs. Sarah smiled, reaching into her pocket and pulling out something that made several council members flinch. A deck of simple playing cards. I propose a game. Hey, game. The word rippled through the universal translators, each species trying to grasp the concept in their own terms. Yes, 1 year. Give humanity one standard galactic year to prove we can contribute something valuable to the Concordat. If we fail, we'll voluntarily isolate ourselves in our home system. No arguments, no appeals. The council members exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of light, sound, and quantum fluctuations. And if you succeed? First speaker Venra asked. Then you accept that your old ways of doing things need to change. Not just for humans, but for all emerging species. No more centuries of observation. No more containment evaluations. A new protocol based on potential rather than control. Sarah began shuffling the cards, the simple motion somehow drawing every eye in the room. But here's the interesting part. We'll prove our worth without using any technology more advanced than what we had before first contact. Just like that ship we arrived in. The Silicon Consciousness representative's hologram flickered rapidly, their equivalent of laughter. You would handicap yourselves while trying to prove your worth. Oh yes, Sarah's smile widened. Because when we succeed, using only our primitive technology, it will prove that advancement isn't just about technical capabilities. It's about imagination, creativity, and the ability to see solutions where others see only problems. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If humans could match or exceed the Concordat's capabilities using inferior technology, It would challenge 5,000 years of assumptions about technological progress and species development. First speaker Venra's patterns had shifted to a complex swirl of colors that few had ever seen. Deep contemplation mixed with excitement. And what task would you set yourself to prove this point? Sarah placed the deck of cards on the table, where it sat like a small monument to human unpredictability. There's a region of space in the outer rim that you call the Desolation. 1,000 ships have been lost there. Your best scientists can't explain the anomalies that appear there. Your most advanced probes disappear without a trace. She leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the shifting lights of the various council members. Give us 1 year to solve the mystery of the Desolation, using only pre-contact human technology. The chamber erupted in a chaos of protests, arguments, and counter-arguments. But beneath it all, something new was stirring: curiosity. The Desolation had defied explanation for centuries. The idea that these newcomers, these upstarts with their welded ships and smuggled beverages, might solve it. Very well, first speaker Venra declared, silencing the chamber. We accept your challenge with one addition. You will take observers from each major council species with you. They will ensure you adhere to your technology restrictions and witness your efforts firsthand. Sarah stood, gathering her cards with a fluid motion. Perfect. Having witnesses will make the story even better when we succeed. As she turned to leave, Elder Xin called out, You seem very confident, human. What makes you so sure you can solve a mystery that has baffled the greatest minds in the galaxy? Sarah paused at the door. Because, Elder Xin, sometimes the greatest mysteries have the simplest solutions. You just have to be willing to think differently. She held up her deck of cards. By the way, would anyone like to learn how to play poker while we prepare for the expedition? The room's quantum crystalline walls absorbed all electromagnetic radiation, but they couldn't quite contain the sound of human laughter as Sarah left the council to contemplate just what they had agreed to. The research vessel, Improbable Solution, drifted at the edge of the Desolation, its hull a patchwork of Earth-made metals and jury-rigged sensors. In the observation deck, 6 alien observers watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as Captain Sarah Chen prepared for their first venture into the anomaly zone. You're using string? High Observer Kex of the Silicon Consciousness asked, his holographic form fluctuating in what might have been disbelief. Actual physical cord to connect your sensor buoys. Copper wire. Actually, Sarah corrected, carefully coiling another length of the primitive material. Since everything electronic we've sent in there goes dark, we're going analog. No quantum entanglement, no subspace fields, just good old-fashioned copper conducting electricity. First observer Venra, who had insisted on joining the expedition herself, watched Sarah's preparations with her bioluminescence shifting between curiosity and concern. And these? Vacuum tubes you're using instead of quantum processors. Technology from Earth's mid-20th century, Sarah explained, patting a large, clunky device that looked absurdly out of place on a spaceship. Simple, robust, and most importantly, immune to whatever's disrupting advanced electronics in there. The observers had spent the last month watching in bewilderment as the humans retrofitted their ship with what they considered antique technology. Gone were the quantum navigational arrays, replaced with mechanical gyroscopes. The subspace sensors had been swapped for simple radar and sonar systems. Even the ship's artificial gravity was now generated by rotation rather than graviton fields. This is madness, muttered the Rigelian observer, his crystalline form vibrating with anxiety. We're going to get ourselves killed using prehistoric technology. Sarah smiled, the same confident smile that had unnerved the council. Sometimes you have to go backward to move forward. We've spent the last month studying every piece of data about ships that disappeared in the Desolation. Know what we found? The older the ship's technology, the longer it lasted before vanishing. She pulled up a crude paper chart, actual physical paper, which had caused quite a stir among the observers when they first saw it. Look at this pattern. Ships with quantum tech disappeared instantly. Ships with conventional computers lasted a few minutes, but there's a record of an old mining vessel from 2 centuries ago that survived for almost an hour before vanishing. So your solution is to use technology so primitive it might survive longer. Kix's hologram flickered with what might have been derision. No, Sarah replied. Our solution is to figure out why primitive tech survives longer. And to do that, we need to go in there and actually see what's happening. Which is what these are for. She gestured to a row of large mechanical devices that looked like oversized phonographs. What are those monstrosities? The Rigelian asked. We call them wave watchers. They're purely mechanical devices that can detect and record wave patterns, everything from sound to electromagnetic fluctuations. No electronics, no quantum systems, just springs, gears, and needles riding on wax cylinders. The observers exchanged glances. They had all seen the complex sensor arrays their own civilizations had sent into the desolation, each more sophisticated than the last, each disappearing without a trace. And what if your primitive devices record something? First observer Venra asked. What then? Sarah's smile widened. That's where the really interesting part comes in. We've been practicing something else from Earth's past, Morse code. When our wire watchers detect something, they'll transmit the data back through the copper wires using simple electrical pulses. Old Earth submariners used similar systems 100 years ago. She turned to face the desolation visible through the observation window. The space before them seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat waves over hot pavement. Another Earth analogy that had required extensive explanation to the observers. But the real key, Sarah continued, isn't the technology. It's what we're looking for. Everyone who's investigated the desolation has been searching for exotic particles, quantum anomalies, or spatial distortions. We're looking for something simpler. Which is? Kix prompted. Patterns. Sarah began activating the wave watchers, their mechanical arms creaking to life. Humans are really good at finding patterns. We see them everywhere, in clouds, in stars, in random noise. Sometimes we see patterns that aren't even there. But sometimes, she let the sentence hang as she made final adjustments to their equipment. The observers watched in uncomfortable silence as their expedition, representing the combined technological might of 1,000 worlds, prepared to investigate one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries using technology that predated their species' first space flights. Tell me, observers, Sarah said as she finished her preparations, has anyone ever considered that the desolation might not be a natural phenomenon? That it might be artificial, created by someone or something that had very different ideas about technology than we do? The silence that followed was broken only by the steady clicking of mechanical sensors and the soft creak of copper wire spooling out behind them as the improbable solution began its careful advance into the mystery that had swallowed 1,000 ships. None of the observers noticed Sarah slip a small notebook from her pocket and make a tick mark next to a list of predictions. So far, everything was going exactly as planned. The first signal came 3 hours into their descent into the desolation. It was barely perceptible, just a slight variation in the scratching of needles on wax cylinders, but it was enough to make Sarah Chen sit up straighter in her captain's chair. There, she said, pointing to one of the wave watchers. Its mechanical arm was tracing slightly different patterns than the others. We're picking something up. The alien observers crowded around the primitive device, watching as it etched patterns into the rotating cylinder. To their advanced sensibilities, it seemed impossible that such a crude machine could detect anything their quantum sensors had missed. It's a pulse, Sarah explained, her eyes fixed on the growing pattern. Regular, repeating. About one every 15 seconds. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching the wave pattern. Reminds me of old Earth lighthouse beacons. Lighthouse. First observer Venra's patterns shifted to confusion. Towers with rotating lights to warn ships away from dangerous coastlines, Sarah explained absently, still sketching. They saved countless lives before we had GPS and modern navigation. The pulse continued, growing stronger as they moved deeper into the desolation. Other wave watchers began picking up different patterns, long, slow waves that seemed to move through subspace itself, rippling the fabric of reality. Remarkable, Kix admitted, his holographic form stabilizing as he studied the patterns. But what does it mean? Sarah held up her notebook, now filled with sketches of overlapping wave patterns. It means we're dealing with something old. Really old. These patterns, they're like echoes, ripples in space-time left by something that's been running for a very, very long time. She turned to the observers. Think about it. What happens to technology when it runs for too long without maintenance? When its builders are long gone but its core systems keep running on basic protocols? Understanding dawned on first observer Venra's face, her bioluminescence flaring bright. It degrades, returns to simpler forms. Exactly, Sarah said. Whatever's out here, it's been running so long it's devolved to basic principles. That's why it interferes with advanced technology, but barely notices our primitive equipment. We're too simple to register as a threat. The implications sent ripples of excitement through the observers. The desolation wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was artificial. A remnant of some ancient civilization's technology, still running after eons, its complex systems degraded to fundamental waves and pulses. But what is it? The Rigelian observer asked. What purpose could such a device serve? Sarah was about to answer when all the wave watchers suddenly went wild, their needles scratching frantic patterns into the wax cylinders. Through the observation windows, they could see space itself seeming to fold and unfold, like origami made of darkness. Navigation buoys, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with realization. They're navigation buoys for something much, much bigger. She rushed to the ship's controls, her hands flying over the mechanical interfaces. Look at the pattern of disappearances over the centuries. They form a spiral, leading to... The space before them twisted one final time. And there it was, a massive structure, angular and alien, its surface etched with symbols no living being had seen in millions of years. It hung in space like a forgotten monument, its purpose lost to time but its basic function still operating, still trying to guide ships safely through whatever this region of space had been when its builders were alive. It's a traffic control system, Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. The ships that disappeared, they weren't destroyed. They were probably redirected to safety zones that don't exist anymore, using protocols no one understands. The observers stared in stunned silence at the ancient structure. Thousands of years of the galaxy's best minds had failed to solve the mystery of the desolation. Yet these humans, using technology centuries behind the galactic standard, had done it in hours. How? Kix finally asked. How did you know to look for this? Sarah smiled, but this time it was a smile of genuine joy rather than her usual confident smirk. Because humans have been finding lost civilizations for centuries. On Earth, we've discovered entire cities buried under jungles, guided by nothing more sophisticated than paper maps and basic tools. Sometimes the best way to understand the past isn't to use the most advanced technology. It's to think like the people who came before us. She turned back to the ancient structure. Now comes the really interesting part. We need to figure out how to talk to it, how to tell it that the civilization it was built to serve is long gone. And maybe, just maybe, learn who built it in the first place. The copper wires trailing behind their ship vibrated with new patterns as the ancient machine began to respond to their presence, like a long-dormant computer slowly waking up, ready to share its secrets with the first beings in millions of years who had thought to look for it with simple enough tools to see it. The celebration in the Grand Hall of the Concordat marked exactly 1 year since humanity's unorthodox arrival. But this time, instead of chaos and indignation, the massive chamber buzzed with excitement and curiosity. At the center of it all stood the same simple deck of playing cards that Sarah Chen had shown the council a year ago, now encased in a quantum crystal display as a symbol of humanity's unconventional wisdom. The ancient Waypoint network, First speaker Venera announced to the assembled representatives, her bioluminescence radiating pure joy, represents the most significant archaeological discovery in known space. Thanks to humanity's unique approach, we have not only solved the mystery of the desolation, but opened up an entire network of preserved alien artifacts spanning the galaxy. Sarah sat in the audience, trying not to look too smug as she watched her former observers presenting their findings. Each of them had been transformed by their experience in the desolation, their rigid adherence to advanced technology replaced by a new appreciation for simpler solutions. The builders of the network, Kix explained, his holographic form stable and clear, appear to have faced a similar challenge to what humanity presented us with. They realized that as technology advanced, it became more complex, more prone to failure over long time periods. Their solution was elegant in its simplicity. Systems that would gradually degrade into simpler, more stable forms while maintaining their basic functions. The Rigelian observer, who had once dismissed their primitive equipment as suicidal, now excitedly demonstrated how they had established communication with the ancient system using nothing more sophisticated than rhythmic pulses of electricity through copper wire. Like teaching a child to count using fingers, he explained, his crystalline form gleaming with enthusiasm. But the greatest discovery, first speaker Venera continued, wasn't the technology or even the historical knowledge we've gained. It was the lesson humanity taught us about progress itself. We had become so focused on advancing forward that we forgot the wisdom of looking back. Sarah finally stood, walking to the podium as the first speaker gestured for her to join them. The ancient Waypoint network is just the beginning, she said, looking out over the assembled species. There are more mysteries out there, more puzzles to solve. And sometimes, the key to solving them isn't to build better sensors or faster computers. It's to remember that every problem can be approached from multiple directions. She pulled another deck of cards from her pocket. She seemed to have an endless supply, and began shuffling them with practiced ease. In poker, we have a saying, play the player, not the cards. It means that sometimes winning isn't about having the best hand, but about understanding how others think and finding unexpected ways to succeed. The chamber erupted in appreciative laughter, a sound that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The formal dignity of the Concordat had been forever changed by humanity's influence, and most agreed it was for the better. Therefore, first speaker Venera announced, we have two declarations to make. First, humanity is granted full membership in the Concordat, with all rights and privileges thereof. She paused, her patterns shifting to something like mischief. Second, we are establishing a new tradition. Each year, on the anniversary of humanity's arrival, we will hold what they call a poker tournament. Not just as a game, but as a reminder that progress doesn't always mean moving forward, and that wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources. As the chamber filled with cheers and excited discussion, Sarah watched various species already trying to learn to shuffle cards with appendages that were never designed for it. The Quantum Logic Collective had created a complex algorithm just to understand the concept of bluffing. The Silicon Consciousness was debating the philosophy of folding versus calling. You planned this all along, didn't you? First speaker Venera asked quietly, her patterns showing knowing amusement. From the moment you crashed our centennial assembly, this was your goal, not just to join the Concordat, but to change how it thinks. Sarah shrugged, dealing out cards to a group of eager aliens. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or even our problem-solving ability, she said. It's our capacity to help others see things differently, to remind them that sometimes the best way forward is to remember what we've left behind. She looked around the chamber, where dignified representatives of ancient species were now arguing good-naturedly about poker hands and trading stories about their own civilization's primitive technologies. Besides, she added with a wink, isn't this much more fun than another millennium of formal protocols? First speaker Venera's bioluminescence sparkled with laughter. Indeed, though I suspect the galaxy will never be quite the same. That, Sarah said, turning over her cards to reveal a royal flush, was entirely the point.